Hello, BookTube, and welcome to Chunksterama. This is a little BookTube event created by me and David Murphy, where we urge you to, during your time of sequesterment, lockdown, quarantine at home, to pull down those big books off your shelf that have been staring at you this whole time, and that you've always said you will get to when you have lots more time, and actually read them now while you do have a bit more time, some of you. And we started off Chunksterama with The Lord of the Rings, which we wanted to be nice and welcoming. It was David's first time reading The Lord of the Rings, and I've read it many, many times. And it was tremendous fun, but I think part of the fun of it masked part of the problem that was inherent in the choice. Because, and the reason it was masked is because it's not really possible for anybody to be an expert in The Lord of the Rings. Right? I mean, you can know more, you can remember more of the proper names, and you can have read in the Silmarillion or the Untold Tales or whatever. But you're on a level playing field there, because you're both appreciating the story. You're both appreciating what's going on and giving impressions of it. And it doesn't matter in a circumstance like that whether you've read it once or 100 times. But the problem inherent in that was unmasked completely with our second choice, which is Adam Smith's 1776 book, The Wealth of Nations, which is a long work of economic analysis, largely regarded as a foundational text of modern economics. And here, the dynamic of familiarity was reversed, because I have only read The Wealth of Nations twice. I think only twice. There was a trade paperback that I had once upon a time. I read it, and that was the one that I carried around, battered all to pieces. And there was also a little mass market paperback that came out. And I thought, even at the time, that was like 25 years ago that mass market paperback came out. I think it was a Bantam. And I remember thinking when I saw it, boy, the day can't be far off. This could be the last mass market printing this book ever has by any publisher. Because mass market paperbacks are disappearing, and the ones that are remaining are strictly pop culture genre fiction. They're romance and science fiction. They're not this anymore. I think I was probably right about that. I doubt that there's been a mass market paperback of The Wealth of Nations in English since that version. And I read that one, and was struck once again by Adam Smith's prose. His prose is actually wonderful, wonderful to read. But those first two times that I was reading The Wealth of Nations, it didn't really, I mean, I'm not saying it didn't dawn on me, but it didn't really seem important that I wasn't really understanding a lot of the concepts that Adam Smith was purporting. After all, I've read a lot of Isaac Newton. I don't understand a word. I've read a lot of Adam Smith's friend, David Hume. I've read a lot of that. There isn't a lot of that. There are chunks of David Hume that I don't understand, and so on and so forth. It didn't really seem all that important to me. I thought to myself those two times that I was enjoying as much of it as I could enjoy. And then David and I picked The Wealth of Nations for our second Chunkster in Chunksterama. And I don't know if you've seen his first video on it. I'll leave a link to it down below. You absolutely should go and see his video. Because David knows this book really well. He knows this book really well. And it's a different kind of knowledge than, for instance, the extent to which I know The Lord of the Rings. It's a different kind of thing because David actually has a degree in higher finance and is going on to get another degree. He's going to have a career in economics. He's read all the subsequent authors, all of whom have worked in one way or another in Adam Smith's shadow, and knows their works really well. He knows Adam Smith's book really, really well. It was a formative text in making him who, or dare I say what, he is today. So that you can easily picture a tiny little David Murphy trick-or-treating as Adam Smith, and having people say, open the door and say, "Oh, who are you? Look at you in your wig. Who are you supposed to be, Bozo the Clown?" And having tiny little David Murphy say, "No, I'm supposed to be Adam Smith. Let me explain his significance." What happened, is what I'm trying to say, is what happened in this Chunksterama is that I suddenly confronted head on what this disparity in expertise really looks like. I have nothing to add, to nothing substantial at all. I am rereading Wealth of Nations for Chunksterama, but as soon as I watched David's video, I immediately realized that I was reading it as an uncomprehending student. It's not that like with Lord of the Rings, where we were two sides of a conversation. Oh, I've read this many times. Oh, I'm reading it for the first time. Ah, what'd you think about this? Ah, what'd you think about that? Instead, it's teacher-student. And that is very much the feeling that you will get when you watch his video. What he's providing in his video on the Wealth of Nations is a graduate level seminar that you get to absorb for free. That I get to absorb for free. He starts out his video by saying that he plans to keep a 30,000-foot view rather than get down in the weeds. And then by the clock on my iPad, 0.00 second later, he is down in the weeds, and he stays there for the rest of the video. But he still manages to make the case, the general cases of what's going on, what's being talked about, what's important in the Wealth of Nations. I could not possibly do that. All that I would do if I made a Chunksterama video on the Wealth of Nations would be to say, oh, I thought this was phrased kind of well, don't understand what it means. I thought that was phrased kind of well, don't understand what it means. Now, picture an actual seminar room at a college. Wouldn't you feel a little irritated maybe that your money and time was being wasted if the professor at the lectern regularly gave over time to a newcomer who was saying things like that? Of course you would. And I'd like to think I have enough self-awareness to know that. So what I want to do is two things here. I have not consulted with David. This will be the first time that he's learning it. But I will give him his marching orders as soon as I'm done. I will Voxer him his marching orders. What I want to happen here for this second part of Chunksterama. First, I want to stress I am not violating the spirit of Chunksterama. I didn't pull down a copy of The Wealth of Nations off my shelf because it turns out I don't have a copy. Instead, I got one from Project Gutenberg. But I am reading it. I am rereading the work. And you should too. Especially since you have a guide, like David, to take you through this. So that's part number one. I want to stress that I am not violating the spirit of Chunksterama. Part number two is that I insist that David continue talking about The Wealth of Nations. All 4 parts, all month long. I insist that he do that, and when we have our regular shirtless Skype session, I will make a point of saying that you have to keep going, even though my third point here is that I am not going to comment on The Wealth of Nations. Obviously, I'm not going to comment on The Wealth of Nations when I am paired with someone who understands it at a professorial level. It's not even graduate school level. He knows everything about it, and all of the essential elements, but also all of the economic and thought currents that emanated from it, and can discuss them at great length. So this is going to be a little bit of a cautionary tale for Chunksterama from now on, because I don't think that imbalance helps at all. I don't know if it makes him discouraged, but it certainly made me discouraged. Discouraged in one sense. I'm encouraged in one way because his video was incredible. And all the other ones are going to be incredible because he's not going to bail on doing this. He's going to talk about The Wealth of Nations. I don't think he's going to need much arm twisting to talk about this book. He's rather hopelessly unclubbable, as you will know if you've watched his channel. But in the future, we should probably pick chunksters that we are on relatively equal footing on, as opposed to this sort of thing. I don't know. We'll discuss it. But in the meantime, I didn't want to let the opportunity to talk about a chunkster go. And it just so happens that David is also talking about a chunkster on his channel that is something that I feel a lot more comfortable talking about. I've also read it a couple of times. I also love it. And it's Richard Evans' trilogy about Nazi Germany. The first volume is The Coming of the Third Reich, where you've got this unlikely coalition that comes together and feeds off the worst aspects of one of the most sophisticated people in Europe in order to put the Nazis in power. And then you have the big second volume. The first volume is sizable, the second volume is hefty, and the third volume is hefty. The middle volume is The Third Reich in Power, and then the last volume is The Third Reich at War. And David he did The Coming of the Third Reich. Those videos are incredibly peppy. Oh my, they're incredibly peppy. And he is now he just barreled right on, and is doing a read-along of The Third Reich in Power. And I wanted to talk a little about it as kind of an informal Chunksterama, because I'm not doing a read-along with him. He's doing this, and I just want to comment that he, in his first video about the first parts of this book, he talks about what a great job Evans does at drawing a picture of essentially a vibrant, thriving society slowly being garroted slowly being pressured to surrender its identity in every field, in every way. And it's a horrifying portrait. In my mind, The Third Reich in Power is the most horrifying of the three books. Coming of the Third Reich, you can kind of, sort of, see glimmers here and there. There are people who leave, there are people who dissent, there are people who scoff at the idea that a bunch of lunatics like the Nazis would ever come to power. And in the Third Reich at War, you start to get comeuppances doled out left, right, and center. You do. You start to get, you know what's going to happen, that the Nazis are going to ruin the country and then get torn apart themselves by the collective vengeance of the rest of the world. But in the Third Reich in Power, there's no sunlight. There might be a little at the beginning, but then slowly but surely, the roof just gets thatched over into iron. Slowly but surely, in every element, every aspect of the Nazi world starts to inexorably tighten into place. Sometimes haphazardly, especially at the beginning, and then with a will. And Evans is great writing about that. It's broken lesser writers than him because it's so incredibly depressing. The cover alone is incredibly depressing. And I wanted to just as an adjunct to David's read-along, and just so as not to give up on Chunksterama completely, because you might have these on your shelves as well and just not have gotten to them. I want to look at a couple of moments in here. One of them I want to talk about. Evans is really good at constantly shifting the kaleidoscopic view of his story to take in high politics, military developments, international developments, and also social and cultural developments. And this is one of those where he writes. This is in a part called "The Mobilization of the Spirit," where he writes about the Nazis' attempt to smother what I mentioned, to garrote, to smother the cultural lives of citizens, to transform them into Nazi androids, and how that fails, which is slightly hopeful. It's at the very beginning of the book, so it's slightly hopeful. But I want to read you just a bit of it here. Let's see here. Trygve Gulbrandsen's romances, with the titles like "And the Woods Sing Forever" and "The Legacy of Bjorndal," published in German in 1934 and 1936 respectively, both sold over 500,000 copies by the time the Third Reich was over. And another worldwide bestseller, Margaret Mitchell's "Gone with the Wind," sold 300,000 German purchasers within 4 years of its publication in Germany in 1937, and was only the most popular of a wide variety of American cultural offerings imported into Germany during the 1930s. When you might not, Evans knows that you might not picture the rank-and-file ordinary citizens of, say, Berlin, reading Gone with the Wind. And yet they were, in huge numbers. Many that had been published before 1914 and were still thought by the regime to be more or less acceptable continued to sell in their hundreds of thousands. Bookstores stayed open. They offered to those who sought a return in the imagination to a sane and stable world. Just as popular were the reliable pleasures of the well-known authors such as Karl May, whose turn-of-the-century stories of the Wild West some have seen as adumbrating Nazi values before their time. You can see that if you look for it in Karl May's westerns, but they're mainly just pure escapism, rollicking good fun. Not very much fun, but you know what I mean. A pure action fest. Certainly they were enjoyed by many committed Nazis, including Hitler himself. Hitler read Karl May, all of them, and was sent boxloads of him. Once fervent Nazis in Germany knew that he liked Karl May, they sent him boxloads of this author. Ordinary Germans did not swallow Nazi literature whole. On the contrary, they chose for themselves what they wanted to read. And from the mid-1930s onward, much of this was not overtly Nazi at all. The success of the Nazi ambition in creating a new human being permeated by Nazi values was as limited here as it was in other areas of German culture. And a lot of those areas are mentioned, stage plays, for instance, musicals, radio dramas, that sort of thing. There was a semi-concerted effort on the part of the Reich's culture manipulators to sort of make that all Nazi, to make it all Nazi propaganda so that everything that you were imbibing and liking was Nazi. And it didn't work. It was rejected. Whenever it was allowed to compete on its own feet with not overtly Nazi stuff, it usually lost. And that is interesting. To me, that is very interesting. But It's a reflection of the fact that this regime, like all totalitarian regimes, the word is right there in the term, they weren't content for you to merely salute on the street. They weren't content for you to send a son to the front lines. They weren't content for you to do all of that and also donate, compulsory donation to the Nazi Party all throughout this time period. It wasn't enough for them that you did all of those things, because you could do all of those things just to get along. And they wanted, like all totalitarian regimes do, they wanted to root out the people who were just going along to get along. They wanted to root out those people, because those people still have a tiny corner of their mind open, and that corner of the mind could turn them. And there's a part here where Evans he explicitly states this, but he also hints at it in other ways too. There's a part here where he says, let's see here, a criminologist named Professor Edmund Metzger uses the phrase, the elimination from the racial community of elements which damage the people and the race. And Evans goes on, as Metzger's phrase indicated, crime, deviance, and political opposition were all aspects of the same phenomenon for the Nazis. The problem, as they put it, of, quote, community aliens. People who, for whatever reason, were not, quote, racial comrades. And therefore, one way or another, had to be removed from society by force. A leading police expert of the period, Paul Werner, summed this up in 1939 when he declared that only those who completely integrated themselves into the racial community could be given full rights of a member. Anyone who was just merely indifferent towards it was acting from a criminal or social mentality, a criminal or asocial mentality, and was thus a criminal enemy of the state, to be combated and brought down by the police. No escape. No way to just go along to get along, because indifference was a crime. Indifference to all the stuff that the Nazis were imposing was a crime. And it started out social deviants, homosexuals, and of course resident aliens, or people who were German to their DNA but who were Jewish, and so had an alienatable second nature that could be used against them. It started out with overt stuff like that, but it was very much aimed at the heart. It was very much aimed at the mind, where you couldn't be indifferent, where you were an enemy alien, and that attitude, we're going to see, that is going to grow like a toxic London fog throughout this book as the book goes on, and as the Nazis tighten their power everywhere. And I don't know. I will consult with David. Maybe he will be okay with me doing Chunksterama bait and switch next week as well. I don't know what else I can do, because I don't have anything to contribute on the Wealth of Nations that's anywhere near what you're getting from him. And that means something, you know. That wasn't true with Lord of the Rings. With Lord of the Rings, you were getting a reader's first impressions. That's valuable. I can't give you my first impressions of Adam Smith, because this is not the first time that I've read him. But I can't give you anything expert either. So I'm going to leave a link to David's video. I'll also leave a link to his part one of his talk on the Third Reich and power. Although you should go and see the Third Reich, the coming of the Third Reich videos, because they're wonderful too. And then I will consult with him in our shirtless Skype sessions to find out what we're going to do with Chunksterama. We will go on. We will pick a Chunkster for July, but we'll watch. I will watch carefully for the expertise gap. It's rather marked in this case. But the main thing I want to stress here is go and watch his video on the Wealth of Nations, and make sure that you leave a gentle, polite, courteous comment insisting that he go forward. I will insist that he go forward. I don't think he's going to need any arm twisting. I think he'll continue to talk about this thing. But I'm learning a lot about a discipline I know nothing about. I know nothing about formal economics at all. I read Schumpeter because, like Adam Smith, he's so much fun to read. But other than that, so anyway, I want you to pay attention to the seminar that is beginning in your midst, and I will wrap up this ersatz Chunksterama now, and we'll see what happens next weekend. Thank you, BookTube.